In this video we will have insights about the different important battles of World War I and end of the war. Throughout the war, a substantial number of battles occurred between the Central and Allied powers which will shape our understanding of the cause and outcome of the war. Battle of Gallipoli, February 19, 1915 to January 9, 1916. In modern warfare's first major beach landing, the Gallipoli campaign saw British and French troops invading the Ottoman Empire at the peninsula of Gallipoli in the Dardanelles Straits, now western Turkey. The invasion was an effort to control the sea route and seize Constantinople. With Western Front fighting stalled, the Allied forces intended the attack to have a swift victory, but ultimately withdrew, with a loss of 180,000 casualties, including more than 28,000 Australian soldiers. Trench warfare quickly took hold, mirroring the fighting of the Western Front. Casualties mounted heavily, and in the summer heat, conditions rapidly deteriorated and sickness was rampant. In December, it was decided to evacuate, first Anzac and Suvla, and then Helles in January 1916. Gallipoli became a defining moment in the history of both Australia and New Zealand, which revealed characteristics that both countries have used to define their soldiers: endurance, determination, initiative and mateship. For the Ottomans, it was a brief respite in the decline of their empire. But through the emergence of Mustafa Kemal as one of the campaign's leading figures, it also led to the foundation of modern Turkey. Battle of Jutland, May 31 to June 1, 1916. World War I's biggest naval conflict, the Battle of Jutland off the coast of Denmark, marks the first and only showdown between German and British battleships. After German forces attacked the Royal Navy, 250 ships and 1 lakh men took part in the bloody fight, where both sides suffered the loss of thousands of lives and several ships. Although there was no clear victor, Britain was able to secure North Sea shipping lanes and continue a blockade of German ports. This blockade proved pivotal to the Allies, which eventually won the war. Initial encounters between the two rivals resulted in the loss of several ships. The Germans damaged BT's flagship, HMS Lion, and sank HMS Indefatigable and HMS Queen Mary, both of which blew up when German shells penetrated their ammunition magazines. Germany failed to achieve the decisive victory. The battle confirmed British naval dominance and secured its control of shipping lanes, allowing Britain to implement the blockade that would contribute to German defeat in 1918. The British lost 14 ships and over 6,000 men, but were ready for action again the next day. The Germans, who had lost 11 ships and over 2,500 men, avoided complete destruction but never again seriously challenged British control of the North Sea. Battle of the Somme, July 1 to circa November 18, 1916. The Battle of the Somme was a joint operation between British and French forces intended to achieve a decisive victory over the Germans on the Western Front. During one of history's bloodiest battles, on the first day alone of the First Battle of the Somme, British forces suffered more than 57,000 casualties, including 20,000 deaths, as they attempted to overrun German trenches and were easily gunned down. The Allies soon changed the tactics in their attempt to fight back the Germans on the Western Front along the Somme River in France in the summer of 1916, but made minimal breakthroughs over a nearly 5-month period. Notable for the first use of tanks, the battle finally ends with more than 1 million casualties. Despite a 7-day bombardment prior to the attack on the 1st of July, the British did not achieve the quick breakthrough their military leadership had planned for, and the Somme became a deadlocked battle of attrition. Over the next 141 days, the British advanced a maximum of 7 miles. More than 1 million men from all sides were killed, wounded or captured. British casualties on the first day, numbering over 57,000, of which 19,240 were killed, make it the bloodiest day in British military history. British commanders learned difficult but important lessons on the Somme that would contribute to eventual Allied victory in 1918. Battle of Verdun, 21 February, the 18th of December 1916. Battle of Verdun was the longest battle of the First World War. It was also one of the costliest. It began in February 1916 with a German attack on the fortified French town of Verdun, where bitter fighting continued for most of the year. The 10-hour opening bombardment saw an unprecedented concentration of firepower, and although the French were forced back, they did not break. In the summer, the Germans were forced to reduce their strength at Verdun after the British and Russians launched their own offensives elsewhere. The Germans had lost over 430,000 men killed or wounded and the French approximately 550,000. The trauma of this loss not only affected French political and military decision-making during and after the war. Verdun also had serious strategic implications for the rest of the war. The Allies had planned to defeat Germany through a series of large coordinated offensives, but the German attack at Verdun drastically reduced the number of French troops available. Britain and its empire would have to lead the big push on the Western Front. Brusilov Offensive, 4 June, the 20th of September 1916. The Russian army had suffered a series of crushing defeats in the first year of the war, but the Brusilov Offensive would be the most successful Russian offensive and one of the most successful breakthrough operations of the First World War. Named after the Russian commander Alexei Brusilov who led it, the offensive used tactics that were to also prove successful on the Western Front. Brusilov used a short, sharp artillery bombardment and shock troops to exploit weak points, helping to return an element of surprise to the attack. The offensive coincided with the British attack on the Somme and was part of the effort to relieve pressure not only on the French at Verdun, but on the Western Front as a whole. The Russian attack also drew Austro-Hungarian forces away from the Italian front and put increased pressure on the already strained and increasingly demoralized Austro-Hungarian army. Germany was forced to redirect troops to the Eastern Front in support of its ally. This was part of an emerging pattern of Austria-Hungary's growing dependency on Germany, which in turn would create a strain on German resources. The Russians were never able to duplicate Brusilov's success. It was their last major offensive of the war and led to an overall weakening, both militarily and politically, of both Russia and Austria-Hungary. The war stoked political and social unrest, leading to revolution and eventually the total collapse of the Russian army. Battle of Vimy Ridge, April the 9th to April the 12th, 1917. In its first attack as a unified force, the Canadian Corps, consisting of the 4 Canadian divisions, launches an Easter Sunday offensive at Vimy Ridge in northern France, claiming a quick and decisive victory over the Germans in 3 days. Part of the Allied Battle of Arras, the well-planned battle uses new artillery tactics and marks the Corps as an elite force. German Spring Offensives, 21 March, the 18th of July 1918. German spring offensives represented a calculated gamble for Germany in trying to tip the balance on the Western Front once and for all. Operation Michael, the first of the offensives, began on the damp and misty morning of the 21st of March 1918. British and Allied troops were met with a huge concentration of German artillery, gas, smoke and infantry. The German army achieved unprecedented gains measured in miles rather than yards. Germany had concentrated all of its resources on the Western Front after the defeat of Russia. Facing them were weary Allied forces that for 3 years had largely been on the offensive, had not fully organized their defenses in depth and were beginning to suffer manpower shortages. On the 11th of April, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig issued a special order of the day using the phrase "backs to the wall" to sum up the desperate but determined fighting in progress that needed to be maintained. The German offensives were tactical successes, they were strategic failures. The advances had no decisive goal other than to punch a hole in the Allied line and primarily target the British. The largest gains took place where the Allies were most willing to give ground. German casualties were high, particularly amongst the best units. The Allies appointed Marshal Ferdinand Foch as Allied Generalissimo to better coordinate a united defense. The tide began to turn, and by early summer the German offensives ground to a halt. Battle of Amiens, August the 8th to the 11th, 1918. The Battle of Amiens heralded the start of the 100 Days Campaign, a 4-month period of Allied success. After surviving the German spring offensives, Allied forces launched a counterpunch of their own, and from the summer of 1918 onwards, they were constantly on the advance. Through the harsh experiences of the past, the Allies had developed advanced operational methods that best used the material power at their disposal. The British Expeditionary Force, BEF, was at the forefront, combining scientific artillery methods and flexible infantry firepower with the use of tanks and aircraft. These combined arms methods were to form a blueprint for the future. Allied attacks were flexible, utilizing surprise and mobility, but also the methodical approach of 1917 when necessary to break German defenses. Casualties were still significant, but the gains were decisive. By November the German army could fight no longer, had been pushed back to the battlefields of 1914 and was moving in only one direction. The 100 Days was an impressive feat of arms that led to Allied victory. Battle of Megiddo, the 25th of September 1918. The Battle of Megiddo marked the beginning of the final British-led offensive in the Sinai and Palestine campaign. It successfully combined cavalry, infantry, artillery, armored vehicles and aircraft to achieve a decisive victory over the Ottoman Turks and their German allies. It was the start of a series of important Allied victories that ultimately led to the collapse of Ottoman Turkish forces and their eventual withdrawal from the war. On the 19th of September, the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, EEF, under the leadership of British Lieutenant General Sir Edmund Allenby, launched an offensive against Ottoman forces in northern Palestine and the Jordan Valley. Victory at Megiddo opened the way to Damascus, which Australian troops entered on the 1st of October. In the weeks that followed, the Allies captured other strategically important cities. On the 30th of October, the Ottoman Empire sought a peace settlement with the Allies and an armistice was signed at Mudros, with hostilities ceasing at 12 noon the following day. This was also after Turkish forces were defeated by Britain and its allies in Mesopotamia. Battle of Mons, November 11, 1918. Fought on World War I's final day, the Canadian Corps captures Mons, Belgium, held by the Germans since 1914, in the Battle of Mons. The early morning offensive happened hours before troops learned that Germany has agreed to an armistice at 11 a.m. It also marked the final death of an Allied soldier, a Canadian shot by a sniper minutes before the gunfire ended. Germany launched the offensive on the Western Front. The offensive failed and the Allies launched a counter-offensive in August of that year, which is a success. End of the World War I. November 1918, armistice is signed between Germany and the Allies in November at the 11th hour. Hence, it was the end of World War I. Paris Peace Conference, 1919-20, the meeting that inaugurated the international settlement after World War I. Following the treaty ending World War I, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed a harsh peace upon Germany and laid the responsibility of starting the conflict squarely on Germany's shoulders.